radioactiva. The direction that we go in the future in terms of power generation is up to us. Where we decide to go, where we will take this, that's what will affect, that's what will provide for future generations. What are we looking at in terms of generating power as electricity providers, as power providers? We're looking at trying to find cheap, clean, and reliable sources of power. Nobody wants to start using things that are too expensive to provide what we're looking at, to provide to our customers. We need to make a profit off of this. This is a business. Now, we've already spent billions building up our countries, providing infrastructure, making sure that the product that we're producing can get to our customers. But it all comes from somewhere. Everything is coming, all this power is coming from our generators. And the question is, what can we do to improve our position for the future? Well, let's take a look at what we're doing now. There are a number of different kinds of power plants that are being used these days. I'm going to take a look at four of them, splitting them up into the categories essentially. First off, looking at coal power. Actually, I'll expand this a bit because there are, from what I've seen, somewhere around 30 different kinds of power plants that essentially fit into the same category as coal. We're taking some sort of fuel, we're burning it. This is providing a rather large amount of power for our customers, but it's dirty, it's messing up our environment. It's non-renewable. These are resources that are going to be running out at some point. And whether it's coal or natural gas or wood, petroleum, any of these, this is something that we need to figure out a way to cut ourselves off from. Next, nuclear power. Nuclear power is clean. There's no waste let out into the environment. It's expensive because there's a huge initial outlay in terms of building the plant, in terms of all the engineering that needs to go into protecting ourselves from what is really an extremely powerful resource, an extremely powerful reaction. Nuclear also has a bad reputation. Think about really only two major accidents that have happened in history, Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, but those things stick out in people's minds.
Fukushima.
I was going to get to that.
Sorry.
And that's in terms of failures of the engineering, but I mark this as vulnerable also because whether it's due to something happening because of actions of man or actions of nature, as happened just a few years ago in Japan, when a tidal wave broke over a nuclear power plant. If containment on this breaks down, we've got rather significant damage to the environment, things that can hurt a lot of people around the area. And finally, there's the issue of nuclear waste handling. Because even though we're not, a perfectly functioning plant is not letting out anything into the environment that is harmful, fuel rods at some point are no longer capable of providing the power that we need. But they're still highly radioactive and they need to be somehow stored safely for several tens of thousands of years before they're safe to handle. Not exactly ideal. So, hydroelectric power. Hydroelectric power is clean. It's also of rather limited capacity and dependent on location. So I grew up in Toronto, right near Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls, as an example, provides 4.9 gigawatts of power. It's a nice, respectable amount, but even though the Ontario Power Company is called Ontario Hydro, most of the power it produces is actually coming from nuclear plants, because that is only capable of providing a fraction of what is needed in the area. And Niagara Falls is actually one of the largest falls in the world. It's one of the largest plants, hydroelectric plants in the world. Finally, solar and wind power. Solar and wind are clean. There's no fuel being burnt, nothing being let out, but they're also rather limited capacity. Wind and solar are both very much affected by weather conditions. Sometimes it's not windy, the fan blades won't turn. Got a cloudy day, those solar panels aren't generating very much. Not reliable, and we need to be able to provide a reliable resource. Now, the amount of power that is being used in the world, from my research back in 2012, so it's probably grown since then, was 18 terawatts. 18 terawatts on average at any given time being produced and used throughout the world. What can provide that kind of power? I'd like to introduce you to the concept of space-based solar power. What is space-based solar power? The name is rather suggestive, but let's go over what exactly it is. Normal solar power generation that we're used to nowadays is shown here. We have sunlight coming down from the sun to the earth, hits the atmosphere. Most of it is actually reflected away. The atmosphere is actually an incredibly good shield for us, protects us from very harmful radiation, but that includes most of what's coming from the sun. What comes down through the atmosphere then hits the cloud cover, and even more of it is reflected. As I mentioned, depending on the amount, on the weather of the day, sometimes you'll get more, sometimes you'll get less. If you got a nice, cloudy, stormy day, you're not going to get very much at all. And what little arrives at the photovoltaic panels at the bottom is what produces actually a surprisingly large amount of electricity throughout the world, but still only a fraction of what's needed. Space-based solar power puts the solar panels up in space. It's a satellite. There are actually a number of different options as to where exactly to put it. It would not likely be in direct Earth orbit. But panels would be placed in space before anything is locked. That means there's no question of atmosphere, there's no question of weather. We're getting everything. To give you an idea of what that means, if you take about a 1 kilometer wide band of space at our location, at where the Earth is located in its orbit around the sun, that 1 kilometer of space is being exposed to over 200 terawatts of power. Now, photovoltaic cells are not perfect converters. Most of what's been in use has been around 5 to 10% efficiency. More recently, photovoltaic cells get up to about 40% efficiency. But even looking at the 10% efficiency that most cells have, that right there in a 1 kilometer band is enough to provide every single bit of power that the Earth needs. So, what does this give us? We have huge energy potentials from direct exposure to the sun in space. It's environmentally safe. There's no weather interference, and there's plenty of room to expand. There's always lots of room in space. If we double our power usage, put up another array, another 1 kilometer array, put up several smaller arrays, it works, it beams the power down to Earth. How about the disadvantages? What is this going to do to us? What is this going to cost us? Well, some of the drawbacks involved are, first off, developing the technology that's needed to provide this power source, getting the satellites up into space. There's the issue of the microwave beam that's beaming the power from the satellite down to Earth. And finally, the receiving station on Earth and the satellite itself in terms of safety, security, whether, again, from man-made interference or from nature. Well, if I address these concerns, first off, the technology is already there. Yes, we can improve it, we can make it better, but if we decide to do it today, we can. We have everything we need to be able to make this a reality. As for lift to space, there are companies like SpaceX, which have been working for the past several years to bring costs down, make it much more affordable to lift payloads into space. Think about what it costs to lift something with a space shuttle. You're talking about over $10,000 per kilogram. Those costs have come down significantly. As for the radiation from the microwave, well, that's well within the limits that are set by the American Safety and Health Agency. It's 1/10 of the normal limit in a workplace of exposure to microwave, and that's right at where the beam is coming down to Earth. Finally, if something actually happens to the receiving station on Earth, there's no harm to any of the surroundings. It's a beam that's hitting Earth, and it can be shut off. And as for the satellite itself, well, that's going to be incredibly difficult for anyone trying to deliberately harm it. And as for being able to handle any sort of natural disaster, say up in space, you might have to worry about debris or of some sort hitting it. That's where you get to the idea of building several smaller satellites as opposed to the one giant kilometer-wide receiver. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's not that they're not concerns, but these are things that we can deal with, that can be handled, and we can move beyond them. So I'd like to invite you to consider, think about a world where we're not burning coal or petroleum. Think about a world where all our power is generated cleanly. Think about a world where cars run off of electricity instead of fuel. Think about what we can build here on Earth and beyond with these sort of resources. This is something that we can do to make a world a better place and to make a profit doing so. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for this wonderful speech. Very interesting.